Hello, and welcome back to Baby Elias's stories. We now return to Blade Runner 3, Replicant Night, by K. W. Jeter. Chapter 16. Deckard sighed wearily. The hell I am. He had been hoping for something more plausible than that. The authorities supposedly want me to carry this briefcase out to the replicant insurgents because it's some kind of bomb? Get real. I am real. Marley's smile didn't change. This is as real as it gets. Come on. Deckard pointed to the briefcase. How much damage could be accomplished with something this size? And it came to me virtually empty, even if it were packed with high explosives. Christ, even if it had been shoved full of fissionable materials. How much of a bang do you think that would amount to? Not enough to destroy a rebellion that spread across all the UN colonies out in the stars. You're talking some big distances there, and a lot of replicants. If this so-called bomb killed thousands of them, even hundreds of thousands, that wouldn't change anything. He shook his head in disgust. How about you figuring something out? Tell me, why would the authorities go to this much trouble just to enable me to carry one piddly bomb out there? Doesn't make sense. Oh, it might. Marley shrugged. Depends on what kind of bomb it is, doesn't it? Problem with you cop types, all you can ever think of are things that go boom. Little boom, you kill one person. Big boom, you kill lots. But that's as far as your imagination goes. There are some things that don't go boom at all, and they kill all the people you need to. For Christ's sake, Batty's voice came from the briefcase. This guy's a liar, and he's not even a good one. Deckard ignored the disembodied words. So you'd like me to believe that there's some kind of biological agent in this thing? A virus, a bacterium, some kind of disease vector? And my taking it out to the insurgents would somehow introduce that disease into their population and wipe them out. Is that it? He felt even more disgusted, considering the shallowness of the concocted story. It doesn't wash. That makes even less sense. 1. Replicant genetics are based upon their human originals, like the way the replicant Roy Batty was based upon the human Batty who got stuck in this box. So the replicant population is as genetically diverse as the human population. So the chance of coming up with a disease that would cut a wide enough swath through the insurgents is just about zero. And second, even if you could come up with a disease like that, some kind of super bug, it would almost certainly be just as deadly for the humans out there in the colonies. The UN authorities aren't going to wipe out all their immigrants in order to take care of the insurgents. What would be the point? You know, Deckard, you're kind of a wordy bastard. For a cop, that is. I get inspired, he replied sourly, when I think somebody's trying to bullshit me. You want a third? I'll give it to you for free. Replicants have 4-year lifespans. You don't have to do anything to kill them off, let alone introduce some bioengineered disease. If all the UN wanted to do was to eliminate them en masse, it would just have to outweight them. Let them come to the ends of their own built-in ropes. Very good. Marley smiled and nodded in admiration. Not bad arguments for somebody who's under the kind of pressure you are. You make some big assumptions, though. You're underestimating both how scared and how ruthless the UN can be. The insurgents have them in a panic. They'd happily kill off the entire human immigrant population if that's what it took to knock the replicants down. They can always get more immigrants. How much rottener does life have to get on Earth before everybody's lined up to go? There's already a nice little bottleneck full of them right here on Mars, just waiting for their tickets out. And as for the business about the replicants and their 4-year lifespans, Marley shook his head. Maybe that's not quite the issue that you think it is. But the main thing is that you're just wrong. You're wrong about what you think I'm trying to tell you. I never said the briefcase has some kind of disease agent inside. You're just jumping to your own conclusions way too fast, Deckard. Maybe you should learn to just sit back and listen for a change. All right. Deckard leaned his shoulder blades into the booth's padding. I'm listening. When I said you were carrying a bomb, I didn't mean the kind that goes boom, or something full of nasty little bacteria and viruses. The smile had evaporated from Marley's face. I'm talking a mimetic bomb. Pure information that changes what people do. In this case, what replicants do. When you were told that there was important data embedded in the briefcase, that wasn't a lie. That's all there is inside it, and that's enough. Enough to take care of the insurgent replicants. Mimetic bomb? What's that supposed to mean? Deckard gazed at the other man in disbelief. You're talking about a meme. Just some kind of idea, and that's all. I suppose it's some really bad one. Something like, why don't we all just commit suicide? It's fun and it's easy. And that bad idea is just somehow going to infect the replicant insurgents. They'll kill themselves and the UN's troubles will be over? You must be joking. You have to be. No. Marley actually looked sad. I wish I were. The shift in the other man's attitude made Deckard uneasy. What is it then? What good is a meme as a weapon if the replicants could just come up with a counter meme for it? Because that's all it would take. Any idea, bad or good, isn't something that people have to obey without even thinking about it. It's not like a bullet or a real bomb. You don't get to argue about those. Guns have triggers, said Marley. So do bombs. The things that make them go off. That's what you don't argue with. When the triggers get pulled, things happen. Real bad things. When the meme is the trigger, a trigger for something that already exists inside the target, then that completes the bomb as soon as you bring the two together. And that's what you'd be doing by taking that briefcase out to the insurgents. The bomb that would go off isn't some bad idea, some little self-destructive notion that they'd be able to argue with. It's something that's built into them, just like those false memories that the Tyrell Corporation implanted into them. It's already in their heads, Deckard, where they can't get at it. They don't even know it's there. But they would as soon as you showed up with that briefcase and the data inside it. What the insurgents out there believe would be a list of the disguised replicants on Earth. Their fifth column that they could contact and bring in on their side. They'd have a big surprise coming. It wouldn't be any list. It'd be their death warrants that you delivered to them. And they'd take care of the killing by themselves. The smile, when it appeared this time, was a mordant twist in one corner of his mouth. That's a pretty good bomb, wouldn't you say? More than one change. The other man's voice had gone deadly cold as well. How does it work? Deckard was almost ready to believe. What is it inside the replicants' heads? Remember what I said about the 4-year lifespans not being an issue anymore? That's got a lot to do with it. Marley leaned across the table. The replicants have changed because of being out there, out in the stars, so far away from Earth. That's what the Tyrell Corporation was afraid would happen, and what the UN authorities have found out to be true. That's what started up the rebellion, made the replicants think they had something worth fighting for. Their own lives. And not just some crummy little scrap with a built-in cut-off date. In the outer colonies, that's what started happening. The replicants began spontaneously living longer than the 4 years they were intended to live. They changed. They're still changing. If that's true, said Deckard slowly, then it means everything. Everything would be different, and not just for the replicants. You got it, pal. That last batch of replicants that escaped and came to Earth, the ones you hunted down, they weren't part of the insurgents. The Betty replicants and the others, they didn't know what was going on. The rebellion hadn't gotten hold of them yet, and they missed it. Marley shrugged. Kind of ironic, don't you think? Cruelly so. The batty replicant and the other ones with him, they all wanted more life, to live longer than 4 measly years. And they could have had that if they just stayed where they were, out in the stars, instead of coming to Earth. That's where their death was waiting for them all along. And it didn't even have anything to do with you. What do you mean? Deckard looked harder at the other man, trying to figure out the words. The spontaneous life extension. It's only happening out there. Marley pointed up to the bar ceiling. In the outer colonies, where the insurgents are. It doesn't happen anywhere near Earth. Actually, there are some indications that replicants who've changed, who've acquired a lifespan longer than 4 years, will revert if they get within range of their home planet, the place where the Tyrell Corporation put them together. Earth is toxic to them. The planet itself is the trigger for that lifespan bomb that Tyrell wired into each one of them. You said they were still changing. The ones out there. That's right, said Marley. Because there's more to life, isn't there? More than just extending your own. There's the cycle. The way one generation gives birth to another. That's a big part. He could already see where Marley was going. But that's something replicants can't do. Give birth. Have children. Replicants are sterile. They can't reproduce. They were designed to be that way. That's how the Tyrell Corporation built them. The only way you could get another replicant will be to have Tyrell build it for you. Deckard regarded his own hands for a moment, then looked back up to the other man. That's the way it's always been. But that's not the way it is now. Now things have changed. The replicants have started to reproduce. On their own, without the Tyrell Corporation. There are replicant mothers and fathers and replicant children. Marley tilted his head toward the Rachel child sitting next to him. And guess what? They look just like human children. The way replicants look like adult humans. And they grow up and become their parents just the same as human children do. Then what's the difference? It was the Rachel child who spoke, peering at Marley. What's the difference between them, between humans and those other people? Ah, Marley nodded. That's a good question. A real good question. Then answer it, said Deckard. I'd like to know. All right, here's an answer for you. Marley regarded the girl for a moment, then looked back up at Deckard. The replicants aren't the only ones changing out there. So are the humans, or what used to be the humans. This is what the UN doesn't want people back on Earth to hear about. It would put a real crimp in the immigration program if it got out that going to the stars has some real hairy effects on the human species. Like what? Sterility, for one. The colonists are in danger of dying out just from lack of reproduction. There hasn't been a human infant born in the outer colonies for nearly a decade. With his thumb and forefinger, Marley made a 0. Nada. No kids. The end of the line, unless the UN starts sending out more colonists, who will in turn go sterile from all the indications. Nobody's found a cure for what's happening. But that's not the only change. The mass reproduction failure is just the most obvious sign that something is going wrong, at least for the humans out there. There's other changes, which are a little more subtle, but just as bad. Are you going to tell me about them? Deckard felt a wave of foreboding pass through him. I'm beginning to be sorry that I asked. Too late for that, replied Marley. It's why I'm here, to clue you in. Here's the deal on what else is happening with the immigrants in the outer colonies. Psychological changes, a decrease in that faculty usually known as empathy. You remember that one, don't you? From your Blade Runner days? The ability to feel what another living creature is feeling. Its pain, its suffering, its joy. Well, the colonists are showing lower and lower marks on their standardized tests that measure that sort of thing. To the point where, if they were administered empathy tests with a void conf machine, they'd flunk. Some of them have already been given the VK tests. They didn't make it. The machine registered them as being below the cutoff point for the empathic response that characterizes human beings. Then they're not human. Deckard saw the cold logic of what he was being told. They're not human any longer. Well, there you go. Hands grasping the edge of the table, Marley sat back in the booth. Life's a bitch, isn't it? Things just happen, and then you have to deal with them. He shook his head as though in wry amusement. Of course, the UN authorities have their own way of dealing with the situation. One hand patted the briefcase's lid. Thus, you and this bomb you were told to carry out to the replicant insurgents? But if what you're saying is true, Deckard no longer doubted it, then they're not replicants anymore. They're the human ones out there. Matter of semantics, isn't it? It's all in how you define the word. Marley's hand gestured lazily toward Deckard. Now you, given your background, being a Blade Runner and all that, you just naturally tend to think that anything that passes a void conf test is human, and anything that doesn't, isn't. And maybe you're right, but what it means is that the UN immigration program has been successful, but not in the way they intended. There is a human presence in the outer colonies, way out there in the stars, but it's not us. It's not the things that used to be human beings. It's those other ones that were the replicants. They're the humans now. Why? Why is it happening? There's different explanations, Marley shrugged. Little hard to get a definite answer right now. The UN authorities want to keep a tight lid. They want to keep a lid on what's going on, and the replicants are busy fighting for their lives and their freedom, all that sort of thing. But there's basically two schools of thought on the issue. One is more or less scientific, having to do with a hypothesized morphogenic field centered on Earth itself, a field that determines, in addition to the genetic code carried in our DNA, the essential characteristics of the human species. The outer colonies are beyond the range of that morphogenetic field. Once that happens, there's slippage for both humans and replicants. Their outward physical appearance might not change, but other things will happen, like the shift in fertility and the empathic faculty. Another shrug. As good a theory as any. Cold, abandoned vistas opened inside Deckard's thoughts. I knew, he murmured to himself. We should never have left home. He found himself inside a seedy bar in the Martian immigrant colony, wrapped in darkness, an image with his name, but not his face, on the scattered video monitors. An image in a long coat like the one he used to wear, moving through neon-laced streets and endlessly deep shadows, none of which were real, but all a simulation, far from home, far from LA. And this isn't even as far as those other ones went, he mused. They went so far and got so lost that they even lost themselves. He wondered what they were like now, those things with human faces that used to be human. A bleak memory came to him of riding back into the colony on the shuttle filled with the native mine workers, the grown-up children that had been born here on Mars, and of feeling alone among them. More alone than he had ever felt, even in LA, where aloneness had pretty much defined the human condition in the thickest of crowds. The stage beyond alone, that of disconnected, he had looked around the shuttle and seen faces like his, human faces, but had felt no kinship with them. In turn, their unfathomable gazes had swept past him with no spark of recognition. They changed just by coming this far, not so much evolved, which implied some better state, but at least adapted. They'd shed their skins, all the excess baggage that came with being human. They didn't need that stuff anymore. Maybe nobody does. What was that? Marley leaned toward him, trying to catch his whisper. Nothing, just thinking. He let the uncheering vision drain away, like water poured on the red desert sands. You said there was some other explanation. What's that one? Simple enough. There are some more mystical types who believe that being human isn't an inherent, genetically based condition at all. Humans don't decide who's human and who's not. That's taken care of by something outside them. Way outside. Marley looked uncomfortable, as though he were speaking of things not meant to be revealed. There's supposedly an aspect of God that's called the eye of compassion, and it can only see suffering. It's blind to everything else. And those things that it sees, the suffering ones, those are what are fully human. Anything else is something less. So there may have been a time when the things that we consider to be human may actually have been that way. But not anymore. The eye doesn't see us, you and I, Deckard. We're part of that which causes suffering. The ones who used to be the replicants. The ones we made. They suffer at our hands. They suffer, and the eye of compassion sees them and judges them to be human. They become human. It's the gaze of the eye. its ability to empathize with other creatures that determines who's human. It's nothing we do. There's nothing we can do about it. He gave a nervous shrug. Anyway, that's what some people think. More human than human. What was that? Marley peered at him. What did you say? Deckard had closed his eyes while listening to the other man. He opened them, then slowly shook his head. Nothing. Nothing important. I was just thinking of that slogan that the Tyrell Corporation had. More human than human. A grim half-smile appeared on Deckard's face. Eldon Tyrell didn't know how true that would be. For a few moments of silence, Marley studied him. You know, though. You know it's true, don't you? He made no reply. He looked at the image of himself on the nearest monitor. That Deckard had a gun raised in one hand and was picking his way carefully over a field of shattered glass. I don't care, he said at last. He looked back around to the other man. Human is as human does. I suppose. It doesn't make all that much difference to me. There was a replicant that I fell in love with, and it didn't matter to me if she was human or not. Like you said, I'm not the one who decides about that sort of thing. That might be, Deckard. But there are still other things that you do have to decide about. That nobody but you can decide. Marley tapped a finger against the briefcase. Like what you're going to do with this thing. Whether you're going to go ahead and try to carry it out to the replicant insurgents, or whether you're going to bag that whole notion because you know what kind of a weapon it is. But I don't know. He looked hard at the man across from him. I've heard a lot of talk from you about what's happened to the humans and the replicants out in the stars. And maybe I even believe some of it. But even if it's true that the replicants have started becoming human, that they live as long as humans, and they have children like humans, that doesn't tell me anything about what's inside the box, and about why it should be so deadly to the replicants. That's right. Batty's voice broke into conversation, coming from the briefcase. Remember that, Deckard? This guy hasn't proven anything. All you know for sure is that he wants to stop you, just like the UN security forces and all the other cops in the universe would like to stop you. He's just got a fancier line. Yeah, agreed Deckard. He does talk a good line, which makes him a funny kind of cop. I'm used to the kind that solves problems with a bullet. He studied the other man, looking for the clue he needed. That was the kind of cop I was. And let's face it, Marley, you're not exactly squeamish about that sort of thing yourself. You didn't have any trouble over killing that Kowalski replicant when you thought you had to. So why are you being so careful with me? I'm not being careful at all, Marley smiled at him. I don't care about you at all. I'm just thorough, that's all. I've got a job to take care of, same as you. So I've got my orders, and they specifically said to leave you alive. Since I'm working for the rep simps, the real rep simps, not the phony-ass UN collaborators who set you up, I figured they must know what they want. Otherwise, I would have taken care of this whole problem my own way. The same way I took care of that Kowalski replicant back at Outer Hollywood. The smile became wider and meaner You know, you cop types are right. A bullet really is the best way. Simple and effective. If I weren't operating under restrictions, you would never even have seen what hit you. And that briefcase would be dismantled to atoms. And I'd be long gone from here. Hey, screw you, pal! Batty's miffed voice sounded again. I'd kick your ass if I could get to it. Both men ignored the angry words. So what is the deal? Deckard pointed to the briefcase. All that stuff you were talking about, a memetic bomb, some kind of data, pure and information, that the UN security forces want to get piped to the insurgents? What kind of data would cause that much damage to make all this worthwhile? You got to remember, said Marley, the Tyrell Corporation had all sorts of clever ideas. Eldon Tyrell had a knack for looking ahead and imagining the worst possibilities, like the replicants is getting out from under his and the UN's control. So they built in things like the 4-year lifespan. But that wasn't the only fail-safe mechanism that Tyrell designed into the replicants. There's another one that's specifically related to the whole reproductive issue. The only reason it works is that it's a variation on a deeply buried mammalian instinct. Some dark coding that's in the primitive layers of the human nervous system, which is, after all, the basis for the replicant nervous system. So it's in there as well. All that Eldon Tyrell did was to invert part of it, design his own little twist into the replicants. Marley took a deep breath before going on. The original instinctive behavior is the one by which adult male animals are driven to kill the offspring of other adult males of the same species, thus increasing the ratio of their own offspring in the breeding group. It's sometimes called the stepfather syndrome. Just one of those ugly parts of genetically directed behavior where the gene's own survival and the propagation are the only things important to it. Morality doesn't enter into equation. What Eldon Tyrell did with the replicants he designed was to program in a pair of aberrations to that basic primitive instinct. The first was to make it much stronger, to the point of being a homicidal obsession. The child murdering behavior takes over the entire organism, overriding even its own instinct for self-preservation. The other aberration on the basic instinct directs the behavior toward the organism's own offspring. You following me? The organism, the replicant, murders his own children. It's like a breakdown in an extended immune system, one that extends beyond the replicant's own skin. The primitive drive is inverted so that the individual attacks and destroys the very thing it's supposed to protect. I don't get it, said Deckard. If that's the behavior that's programmed into the replicants, then there's no contest. There's no way that they can win any kind of struggle against the UN's colonists. Because they'll destroy themselves. They'll reproduce, but they'll murder their own children. It's all over for them. They're a biological dead end. Not quite. The stepfather syndrome behavior is built into them, but it's buried. It's not activated unless it's triggered. That's where you come in, Deckard. You and the little job you agreed to undertake for the cops and the UN security forces that had managed to infiltrate the RepSimp underground. You're carrying the trigger right here in this briefcase. The data that's been embedded in it isn't any list of disguised replicants on Earth. That was just the cover story to get you to agree to the job. What the people who put this together did was encode the mimetic bomb, the trigger to activate the buried behavior pattern, and stick it in here, in this box. Then they wrapped it up like putting a bow on a birthday present by embedding Roy Batty's cerebral contents in there. More to goad you into taking on the delivery job than to actually help you get there. Because in reality, you don't need any help. There's no real effort being made by the authorities to stop you. The UN and the police, all of them, they want you to get there. You're delivering that briefcase to the replicant insurgents is what their big plan is all about. You'd be showing up on the replicants' doorstep with the trigger to the bomb that's already wired into them. The buried behavior pattern would be activated and there'd be nothing they could do to stop it. And that'd be the end of the replicants. When they die, there'd be no replicant children to replace them. "This is crap," growled Batty's voice. "Don't listen to this jerk. He's just playing with your mind, Deckard. He's the one who's working for the authorities." "I'm afraid our friend here protests too much." Marley rapped his knuckles on the briefcase's lid. "He's hardly a disinterested party in this whole affair, is he? Since his whole existence is bound up with what the two of you have been told about his contents, and why you should go ahead and deliver them." "There's someone else," said Deckard. "Batty's not the only one. There was someone else who convinced me I should do it." "Ah, yes, our transcendent authority in these matters." Marley nodded. "The good Sebastian, who's gone from this mortal realm to a higher, if slightly smaller one. It only goes to show that even a deity, albeit a dehydrated one, can be wrong." "You knew I went to see him in his little pocket universe?" "Of course," Marley gave a casual shrug. "The people I'm working for, the real Rep Sims, know all kinds of things. The other Rep Sims may have been infiltrated and taken over by the police, but it doesn't end there. My bunch has its contacts and moles on the other side. They know what kind of data was embedded in the briefcase, and what else they put in it, and what they instructed Batty to tell you so you'd go off and get convinced by Sebastian about your holy mission, your delivery job. The problem is, Sebastian can tell you only what he himself believes to be true. He's not omniscient, at least as far as this world goes." If he couldn't believe Sebastian, and Deckard had to admit that could be the case, that the little genetic engineer, even in his new transfigured incarnation, could have been lied to and misled. The question became, once more, a matter of trusting anyone at all. This Marley character had at least the advantage of a certain cold logic on his side to carry his arguments. "They've made it easy for me," thought Deckard. He glanced over at the video monitor. All it would have taken, a simple thing, was to have let the director Urbenton go ahead and dub Deckard's face onto the actor playing him. A standard production technique. And then I would have been a marked man. Anybody in the immigrant colony could have recognized him and turned him in. If the authorities had, in fact, been hunting him down. But instead... "You're asking me to believe a lot," said Deckard. "Not that everybody I run into hasn't been doing the same, but this stepfather syndrome business, this mimetic bomb that I'm supposed to be carrying, that seems pretty extreme. Why should I believe you on this one? Got any proof?" Mere evidence isn't enough for you. The smile appeared on Marley's face again. Or logic. What you can figure out about what's happening around you. It's not that. Deckard didn't bother with a smile. I just don't trust murderers. One of Marley's eyebrows rose. So not even yourself? Especially not myself. All right, said Marley, exuding an affable calm. You want proof? Or at least as much as can be gotten in this fallible universe? Fine. You've been carrying it around with you. The briefcase? Deckard laid his hand on it. I thought that was the whole problem, not the answer. Well, maybe you've packed a few extra things inside. Things that might sort out the situation a little bit. Marley pulled the briefcase out from beneath Deckard's palm and turned it around toward himself. Get your hands off me! Marley ignored the protest that came in Batty's voice. His thumbs pushed back the latched buttons on either side of the handle. A second later, he had thrown the lid back, exposing the lined interior. Not a lot in here, he glanced up at Deckard. You could have made better use of it, you know. Thrown in a change of clothes or something. No matter, there's enough. At least for right now. Leaning back against the booth's padding, Deckard watched as the other man examined the briefcase. A rectangular packet, one end torn off and then folded down to preserve the contents, was held up before him. You held on to this? Marley looked at the name Sebastian on the packet. Thought it might come in handy, I guess, just in case you wanted to talk to him again. Though what more he could tell you, I have no idea. Still, maybe you could just keep it as a little souvenir of your travels. He laid the packet down on the booth's table. The briefcase's lid blocked Deckard's view of the other man's hands rummaging inside. Or perhaps you just wanted to keep the original package altogether, with all the bits and pieces. Since the collaborator rep simps, the ones the cops have taken over, put this in here, you might as well keep it the way it came to you. But this is something new. Marley held up another object. I know what was in here originally, and this wasn't part of it. You just put this in here since you got back from Sebastian's pocket universe. Deckard looked across the table and saw a square of white enameled metal in Marley's hand. The other man turned it slightly, revealing the broad red cross on the small box's lid. The old first aid kit. Ancient, perhaps, considering how battered and scuffed it appeared. He had almost forgotten about it. When he had left the hovel, tugging the Rachel child along with him by one hand, the briefcase in the other, he had stopped when he had felt the little metal box slipping out of his jacket. He had popped open the briefcase and thrown the box in there for safekeeping, not even trying to figure out why he was hanging on to it at all instead of pitching it away as a worthless piece of junk. You do remember, don't you, where you got this? Marley held the white metal box up in front of his smile. It wasn't that long ago. What do you know about that? The question of just how extensive the other man's sources of information were troubling Deckard again. You weren't there when it happened. No, admitted Marley, but I knew Sebastian had this. It's a pretty important little item, even if it doesn't look it, so it's worth keeping track of. If Sebastian had it, and now you do, chances are good that you got it from him. Logical, huh? And I'm right, aren't I? A nod from Deckard. So what's so important about it? Well, why don't we take a look? Marley gave a playful wink. Shouldn't be too hard for a couple of geniuses like us to figure out. Let's see. With his thumb, he pried open the lid. Rust in the hinge joint creaked as the flat metal was prodded back by one fingertip. Not too promising if you're looking for the secrets of the universe. He glanced up at Deckard. Old bandages and dried up disinfectant. The fingertip now pushed around the box's antique-looking contents. How about these aspirin? When he pried the lid off one of the tiny bottles, the decayed vinegar smell wafted through the booth. I think the expiration date might have gone by already. Cut the crap! Deckard scowled in irritation. Get on with it! Marley ignored him, continuing with the routine. Not much else in here. Hardly seems worth the trouble, does it? You'd have to wonder why anybody would make a fuss over something like this. I know what that is. At the back of the booth, the Rachel child had pushed herself forward, hands flat on the table so she could see better. There were things like that where I came from, like that box and all that stuff in it. Of course there were. Marley turned a smile toward the girl. You're absolutely right, sweetheart. He glanced over at Deckard. She knows what the score is, or at least part of it, because this is a standard issue item, something that was stocked in all the transports going outside Earth orbit. No big deal, just your basic little kit for small emergencies. Incidents you didn't need to bother going to the infirmary for. There was probably dozens just like this aboard the Salander 3. But this particular one is very special. Not because of the bandages and the dead aspirin, but something else. It's all old, the Rachel child's brow creased as she studied the box in Marley's hands. The ones we had, they were new. I mean, they weren't all beat up like that one. Sure, Marley said. That's because those other first aid kits were still there with you, where there wasn't any time. This one fell out. Well, it was taken out. Somebody carried it out of the Salander 3 because they had found out how important it was. So it's been out here in real time. And that's where things get old and beat up, like this. He turned back toward Deckard. You don't know yet what I'm talking about, but you will. I don't know if I want to. You don't have a choice, Deckard. Not anymore. Not that you ever did. Marley set the first aid kit down on the table. If it's not the contents, all this old crap, then maybe it's the box itself. Think that could be? He didn't wait for an answer. See the inside of the lid here? What's it look like to you? Paper, molted and brown by the same passing of time that had marked the small box's interior. Deckard didn't see anything remarkable in the thin lining. That's all. Probably it was some instructions or a list of supplies. The paper was blank. Whatever words that had been on it long since faded. Standard issue, like you said. Wrong on that one, pal. Marley watched as one of his fingernails picked at the edge of the paper. What was standard on these kits was to have the contents list printed right on the metal. See? Like that. One corner had been peeled away enough to reveal the black lettering beneath. So somebody must have stuck this in here. For a reason. He grasped the wrinkled paper between thumb and forefinger and tore it away. Which you shall see. Something else was behind the paper. A rectangle just as thin but stiffer. Marley pulled it from the hiding place and looked at it for a few seconds before handing it across the table. A photograph. Deckard held it by the edge, looking into the frozen section of the past that had been caught there. He was still looking at it and listening to Marley explain what it meant, what it showed, listening and understanding at last, when the first bullet hit. For a moment, Deckard thought it was something from the video monitor, something that was happening to that other Deckard, the actor playing him in the reenacted past. The noise of the shot was so loud that it pulled his gaze away from the ancient, long-hidden photograph and toward the monitor. That Deckard, with his long coat, but without his face, was backed up against a motorized, urban trash retrieval unit. The gun was a gleam of black metal spinning away, knocked out of his hand by the taller figure looming above him. A quick scream of fright from the Rachel child, and he realized that the shot had been in this world and not in the one held by the monitor. The bullet had torn into the fiberboard ceiling above the booth, gouging out a ragged trench from which a loop of electrical conduit dangled like a silvery intestine. The second bullet took out the video monitor a few feet away, sending bright specks of glass across the floor and the table, as though that other Deckard and the small world had been further reduced to their component atoms. A furious energy propelling them from one reality to a larger one. Deckard's hand, guided by its own instincts, was already pulling the gun from his jacket as his gaze snapped toward the doorway. Black uniformed figures stood between the bar's darkness and the light outside, their weapons raised and aimed straight toward him. She saw everything that happened. They had told Sarah to stay back, out of danger. They would take care of the situation. Right now, she didn't have to do anything except watch. "These guys are professionals," said Urbenton, standing beside her on the street outside the bar. The area hadn't been cordoned off. No need. The operation wouldn't take more than a few minutes. So a small crowd from the emigrant colonies, surrounding alleys and warrens had formed, attracted by the audible stimulus of the gunshots and raised voices. "I wanted to use some of my video crew. I figured they're good enough at faking this kind of thing. They should be able to pull something off in reality, with real guns and stuff. But I got overruled on that account, so we got the heavy hitters on our side." A glance over her shoulder, and she saw a few more of the uniformed men keeping the gawkers back with well-directed blows of their rifle butts. She looked back toward the doorway of the seedy bar, where all the rest of the UN-provided stormtroopers had blitzed a few seconds ago. "I'm going in there," she said, walking without haste toward the scene. "Hey!" The short, round video director grabbed at her arm, trying to pull her back. "You can't do that!" She shook Urbenton off and kept walking. The predictions had been right. The extraction procedure was happening so fast that Sarah managed to see only the last bit of action. She had no qualms about being around the UN's elite squad members. They reminded her, in their wordless, cold-eyed efficiency, of some of the men who had worked for her when she took over the Tyrell Corporation. They set about their jobs and did them, and they melted back into the shadows, minus whichever of their number had crossed over and become corpses. Standing in the bar's doorway, looking down the short flight of steps that led in, Sarah could see overturned tables and chairs, the few unnecessary figures of the other patrons shoved up and huddling against the walls. The ceiling-mounted video screens either smashed or still displaying the end sequence of Deckard's reenacted travails in Los Angeles. At the far end of the space, the targets, the whole reason for her bargain with Urbenton and his backers. A last flurry, which she was able to witness over the dark uniformed shoulders. Deckard, sitting at one side of a booth, had pulled a gun out of his jacket, the same weapon he had taken from her back at the hovel. Before he could level it and fire, the other man, she had been told he would be there and for whom he was working, reached over and wrested the gun away from Deckard. The other man had a more urgent agenda, one that he had a chance of accomplishing. He emptied the gun's clip into the briefcase lying on the table. At that close range, the elongated bursts from the gun's muzzle touched the briefcase's imitation leather like quick tongues of fire. The heavy slugs ripped the briefcase into tattered shreds, suspended for a moment in the air beyond the table's edges. A cry, not of pain but furious rage, sounded from the fragments before they fell in twisting. Charred scraps across the glass-littered floor. That was all that the man sitting across from Deckard accomplished. The UN troopers had their orders. The man was driven backward by the assault rifle's bullets, his chest shattered to the spine. Deckard had scrambled from the booth, reaching to grab the barrel of the nearest gun. The trooper expertly turned the rifle around, catching Deckard across the angle of the jaw, the hard blow sending him sprawling and unconscious. Another stormtrooper reached into the booth and grasped the wrist of the little girl cowering there, then yanked her out into the open. The operation was over, silence filling the debris-strewn bar. "Let's go," said Benton, taking Sarah by the elbow and drawing her back from the doorway. "Nothing else is going to happen here." The troopers behind them swung their rifles, clearing a path to the ground vehicle that would take them out to the emigrant colony's landing field. "You should have killed him," Sarah said when she and the video director were back aboard the Shadow Corporation's yacht. She had kept her silence until then. "When you had the chance." "But that wasn't the deal we made." Benton glanced up at her, then returned to fussing with the intercom buttons on the lounge's deck. "You accepted my help, all the assistance we needed to pull this off, but you knew there were conditions attached. You should just be grateful that the authorities owed me a favor for going along with them on that video they just broadcast here." She sat back in the wing chair, her favorite one. "You sound like you're not even interested in having Deckard killed." "I'm not, particularly. I just think it'll make a great tape when it happens. A really neat show. Even better than this last one I did." His broad fingertips jabbed at another button. "And I just wanted to rev up the image. That's all. The right set, the right feel. It'll be wonderful." Another voice spoke up, unprompted by any of Benton's poking at the intercom controls. When it finished and clicked off, he turned toward Sarah. "That's it," he announced. "They've got the little girl aboard. We're ready to go." Finally, she thought. She could feel it deep inside herself. The end time coming at last. She didn't care if Benton and all the rest of them went on acting and talking as if they could also perceive her hallucinations. It didn't matter. She didn't even care which LA they were heading toward, just as long as she knew that, soon enough, Deckard would be there as well.